Kathy, press play.
Play, Midawaloktiok, Nin Katalanan Maltai, a Weligiskuk. Hello, my name's Catherine Martin. It's a beautiful day, and I'd like to welcome everybody to the unceded territory of my ancestors, the Ulnu, or how we know them today as the Mi'kmaq. And because of the good thinking of our ancestors in 1752, thinking 7 generations ahead of us, they signed the Peace and Friendship Treaty to ensure that we always continued to live as we always did. I want to honor today, especially Sarah Denny, who taught me to sing this chant. Whenever we gather with other nations, whenever we gather to celebrate, whenever we gather to feast. Sometimes it's called the feast chant and sometimes the gathering chant. And Sarah Denny spent her life bringing back our traditions, our culture, our language, our dances, because for many years here in this country, it was against the law for us to celebrate and to speak our language and to practice our ceremonies. So Lalan to Sarah Denny and her family who continue to bring these beautiful teachings to us.
Good evening. For those of you who do not know me, I'm Teresa Ray-Jack-Talley, Dalhousie's Vice Provost for Equity and Inclusion. Dalhousie University sits on the ancestral, unceded, and unsurrendered territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation. We are all Peace and Friendship Treaty beneficiaries. It is with this respect for the elders that we open the forum with a Mi'kmaq welcome by Dalhousie's Director for Indigenous Community Engagement, Catherine Martin. The Office of the Vice Provost for Equity and Inclusion is also the home for Dalhousie's Director for the African Nova Scotia Community Engagement. Particularly on a day like today with our panelists, We like to acknowledge the histories, contributions, legacies, and elders of the African Nova Scotian people and communities who have been here for over 400 years. Welcome. This is our first Speak Truth to Power Forum for 2021, after a very successful run in 2020. Thanks to the team, former and extended, that work to make these forums a reality, and to you, our supporters and our panelists. Today, we have a very powerful panel to speak truth to power, typical of our forums, but we are also paying tribute to 5 of the first Black women leaders breaking barriers in public service. This special episode is being held in honor of Black History Month, which was held in February, and Women's History Month that is celebrated in March. Although for many of us, we believe that every day is Black women's history in making. When we started planning this episode, we knew that the event is both overdue and timely. Overdue because it's the first of the first for us at Dalhousie, and timely because this month, for the first time, we have 4 highly qualified Black women appointed within the provincial public services in senior influential roles. Adopting the practice from Black Lives Matter, I would like to call their names. Dr. Kessa Monroe Anderson, Deputy Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage, Andrea Anderson, Public Services Commission, and Nicole Johnson Morrison, Associate Deputy Minister of Labor and Advanced Education. These 3 women joined Deputy Minister Candace Thomas of the Justice Department, who was appointed last year, and who was Dalhousie's first Black female chair. Deputy Minister, I hope you're watching because we plan to have you on our show sometime soon. Dear colleagues, friends, and community, we are so excited and extremely anxious to hear the inspiring stories of each of these leaders who will share with us on this panel and who will provide an unapologetic narrative and critical analysis of their experience navigating their racial and gendered environments then and now. And at the same time, provide courage and wisdom to inform us on the way forward. This forum is also an opportunity for us at Dalhousie and you, the audience, to recognize and pay tribute to the 5 Black female leaders who are indeed trailblazers, paving the road for so many of us to travel on. A road I am sure was filled with potholes, hills, and valleys. So thank you. I would like to say on your shoulders we stand, but I'm a little skeptical to do so, as I recall what a 105-year-old civil rights fighter who attended one of the US State of the Union said, as many people passed by her in the hall and said, "Miss Amelia Boynton, we stand on your shoulders, we stand on your shoulders." "I hear you, Miss Boynton," she replied, "get off my shoulder, there's plenty of work to do." So I will now stop with my introduction messages, and so that we can hear the esteemed panelists. But before I do so, I have some housekeeping notes and an introduction to my co-host. Housekeeping notes: we will be inviting our speakers to join in accordance with the program. Everyone's camera and microphones have been turned off to ensure that only our guests are on the screen. Unfortunately, there's no chat feature or Q&A. We did receive questions prior and will use those at the end in the Q&A session. This event is live streamed and recorded as an educational tool for future reference. We have also started closed captioning for those who need this feature. As this is a virtual event, it is possible that we may experience technical difficulties. We appreciate your patience if this may occur. And now, I am thrilled and honored to have as my co-host a Dalhousie undergraduate student who is also a first in our Dalhousie University. Shirley Hodder grew up in a small Black loyalist community called Gibson Woods in the Annapolis Valley. Shirley currently resides in Halifax, studying a BSc in Health Promotion at Dalhousie University. Shirley has had a unique life as she was raised within a marginalized family by two hearing impaired parents. Shirley has a close relationship with her mother, Tracy Gibson, who hosted ASL sessions on Dal campus. Due to Shirley's experience growing up with having two hearing impaired parents, and also born and raised in a marginalized African Nova Scotia community, has inspired Shirley to take an interest in trying to combat different social justice issues happening in her community. These include a very impressive and ambitious list, Shirley. It includes combating systemic racism in Nova Scotia public school system towards African Nova Scotia, addressing inequities that the hearing impaired and other persons with disabilities face. Shirley hopes to get into Dalhousie's Master's in Public Health Administration and further develop her skills so that she can lead in creating positive change throughout Nova Scotia and nationally. I think we can all agree that Shirley is deserving and capable of being a first of first on this panel. So with that short introduction, I will hand it over to Shirley's capable hands. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Teresa, for the introduction. I would like to now read the 5 presenters' bios in order. So we'll start with Yvonne Atwell. Yvonne Thomas Atwell has engaged in community development and social change, primarily in African Nova Scotia communities, for more than 20 years. She is the former executive director of the Community Justice Society, where she served from 2005 to 2016. CJS works with many partnerships to administer restorative justice programming to youth and adults at risk or in conflict with the law. She's the owner of Atwell and Atwell Human Resource Consultants since 1999. She was the executive director of the African Canadian Employment Clinic, policy advisor, and diversity officer for the Maritime Center for Excellence in Women's Health at Dalhousie University. She holds a certificate in financial literacy from the Rothman School of Business, University of Toronto. She's currently retired now. Her many volunteer activities over the years included serving as a board member for the Indigenous, Black, and Mi'kmaq program at Dalhousie University and chairperson of the African Canadian Caucus of Nova Scotia. She was also one of the founding members of the Health Association of African Canadians, HAC, and served on the board for several years. Recently, Yvonne served on the task force for the commemoration of Edward Cornwallis and the recognition and commemoration of Indigenous history. In 1998, Yvonne was elected as the first African Nova Scotian woman to sit in the Nova Scotia House of Assembly, where she served for 18 months. She was named honorary member of the Canadian Society of Immigration Consultants in 2007, acknowledging her work as a public interest member of the board. She is the proud mother of 3 daughters and 4 grandchildren. Our second one is the Honourable Wanda Thomas Bernard, Senator of Nova Scotia. Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard is the first African Nova Scotian woman to be appointed to the Senate of Canada, representing the province of Nova Scotia and her hometown of East Preston. Senator Bernard champions issues impacting African Canadians and people living with disabilities. She is particularly invested in human rights, employment equity, and mental health. Through her involvement in community projects, her social work career, her time with Dalhousie School of Social Work, and now her work in the Senate and as deputy chair of the Standing Senate Committee on Human Rights, Senator Bernard has maintained a deep dedication to social justice and racial justice. Senator Bernard advocates for reparations for the historic and continued anti-Black racism impacting the lives of African Canadians in her work. The next presenter will be Marlene Clark. Marlene Tynes Clyke grew up, completed her schooling, and married in Halifax. She has a wonderful son, Les, and 2 lovely granddaughters. Ms. Clyke's husband served in the military for 30 plus years. They spent 6 wonderful years in southeastern Germany in the 1970s. She worked there as an administrative assistant and retired from Imperial Oil Ltd. in Dartmouth. Ms. Clyke belongs to several organizations such as Order of Eastern Star, Daughters of the Nile, and New Horizons Baptist Church in Halifax. Marlene Clark was one of the first Black women to join the Army Reserves in the 1950s. Ms. Clyke enjoys meeting people and visiting our seniors in the community before COVID-19. Our next one will be Dr. Lynn Jones. Dr. Lynn Jones is a proud African Canadian born and raised in Truro, Nova Scotia. Her Nova Scotia roots span several generations, making her one of several Indigenous African Nova Scotians residing here over 400 years. She is a Pan-Africanist whose travel takes her across many countries and her ancestral home on the continent of Africa. Being employed as a federal public service employee for over 30 years, coupled with her extensive experience in the Canadian labor movement, enabled Lynn to be a social justice leader in areas many Black people had never ventured before. This includes being the first Black General Vice President of the Canadian Labour Congress and National Vice President of the Canada Employment and Immigration Union. Lynn leveraged her community and labor background to become the first Canadian-born African woman to seek office in a federal election in Canada. Jones is the recipient of the Queen's Medal and chair of the Global African Congress Nova Scotia chapter, an organization which seeks reparations for the atrocities of the Atlantic slave trade. Lynn has been in the vanguard of the fight for fair labor practices for many years, including most recently, the joint campaign Fight for 15, which attempts to win an increase in the minimum wage for all workers. Lynn recently donated over 50 years of personal archival material on the Black, local, national, and international community to the St. Mary's University Library and Archives, where it is now housed as the Lynn Jones African Canadian and Diaspora Heritage Collection. She holds honorary doctorates from Acadia and Mount St. Vincent University. And our last bio will be the Honourable Dr. Mayann Francis, ONS. The Honourable Dr. Mayann Francis, ONS, served as Lieutenant Governor for the province of Nova Scotia from 2006 to 2012. She was the first African Nova Scotian and second woman to be appointed as a Vice Representative. Dr. Francis served from 2015 to 2020 as the first Distinguished Public Service Fellow in the Faculty of Management, School of Public Administration at Dalhousie University. In December 2020, she was appointed as the Dean's Warden for the Cathedral Church of All Saints, Halifax. She is the recipient of 6 honorary degrees and an honorary diploma. She has served in many leadership roles, including chair of the board for Atlantic School of Theology. Dr. Francis graduated from St. Mary's University with a Bachelor of Arts degree and a Master's in Public Administration from New York University. In addition to her list of credentials, Dr. Francis can add author. Nimbus Publishing published her first children's book, Man's Train Ride, in October 2015, which was translated into French in 2018. Her memoir, Mayann Francis, An Honourable Life, was released in June 2019 and was listed in the Hill Times list of 100 best nonfiction books in 2019. The Hill Times is Richardson's Nonfiction Award in June 2020. The Hill Times is Canada's politics and government newspaper. Her memoir was also shortlisted for the Evelyn Richardson Nonfiction Award in June 2020. The Audible version of her memoir is also available. Dr. Francis is working on her second children's book scheduled for publication in 2021. She is in great demand as a speaker and is sought after for her leadership experience. Now, I would like to introduce our first speaker, the Honourable Wanda Thomas Bernard, Senator. Thank you.
Hello.
Yes, you're on, Senator. Go ahead.
My apologies.
That's okay.
It's been quite the afternoon. So for folks who don't know, on March 13th, 2020, I traveled to Whitby, Ontario to babysit my 2 grandsons during March break 2020. And COVID happened. And I've been with them ever since. So we had a little bit of a struggle today with the childcare. Their parents, my daughter and son-in-law, are small business owners. And we have a very complicated arrangement in terms of managing through the pandemic. So talking about being a first of the first, it's a very interesting topic. So to the coordinators, I want to say thank you. To the moderators, I want to say thank you for the invitation to be here, to join you. Of course, as a Dal alumnus and professor emeritus now at Dal, Dalhousie has a very special place in my life, on my life journey, and clearly on my journey in terms of leadership in the public sector. I would say that when I look back on my life journey, I would not have imagined that I would be where I am today, because there was nothing in the spaces that I entered that encouraged or supported me to move in this direction, to encourage leadership in that sort of way that would prepare you for leadership in the public sector. But as Teresa said in the intro, I stand on the shoulders of so many people, and too many for me to mention here today. But I want to acknowledge that I stand on the shoulders of our ancestors. And the fact that I am the first in anything, and I've been the first in far too many things on my journey, the fact that I'm first in anything at all is really bittersweet. And let me tell you why. It's bittersweet because when I think of my ancestors who've been here since the 1700s, and I live in the community of East Preston, one of those Black loyalist communities on land that was granted to my ancestors. When I think of how hard they worked with so little, when I think of how hard they fought just to be treated with a modicum of respect, when I think about the barriers that they faced, they could have, should have, would have been first in many of these spaces had they been given any kind of opportunities. So as I look back on the journey, I look back to my time spent in segregated school. Schools were legally segregated in Nova Scotia, but it was a privilege as well to be in a school where the teachers and the principals encouraged you, encouraged your learning, supported you, supported your learning. And it was a safe space. I went to Partridge River School in East Preston, and I was academically well prepared. When I went into the integrated school, the high school, Graham Creighton High School, when I went into that integrated high school at the age of 12 in grade 8, I was academically prepared for that school, but I was not emotionally prepared to deal with the racism that I would face in that school. And survival, how did I even survive that? How did I end up even going into post-secondary education? Because that was never encouraged or supported by this high school, the guidance counselor, nor the teachers. It was an outside sponsor. We weren't using the language of sponsorship in those days. But my sister and I benefited, and some other young people back in the day, in the late 60s, we benefited from the sponsorship of the late Captain Don Dennison, because he knew, he was a white man, and he was part of the NSAACP, the Nova Scotia Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And he knew that post-secondary education would be a gateway, a pathway to other opportunities. And he's the reason that we had access to post-secondary education. But when I think about the journey and I think about the positioning to leadership, I would say that in addition to my post-secondary education, the BA, MSW, the PhD. Those things all prepared me academically. However, I was also engaged, actively engaged in social justice education at the community level. So I think about the work that the late Rocky and Joan Jones did through Kawacha House. I was one of those young people who was sitting at the feet of these elders who were engaging us in awesome conversations about social justice, about racial justice, about, guess what, folks? Black Lives Matter. You see, we've been doing this work for generations, and I learned from some of the best, absolutely learned from some of the best. And so that journey, those parallel journeys, so the academic preparation met the social justice preparation. And that social justice preparation truly came from the community. And so in each of those positions where I've been the first, I've tried to, first of all, acknowledge the tokenism that's beneath that, but also to use that position to create space for others to come along, to create opportunities, to open the doors for others, and to fight for change at every opportunity. So when I think about being an African-centered leader in a Eurocentric environment, I think about the challenges, and there are many, but I saw each of those challenges as an opportunity for change, as an opportunity to remove barriers, as an opportunity and a responsibility to lead change, to make change happen. And research has been one of the tools that I've used, and using research to lead change. There's a publication coming out very soon on a project that I led around Black women in the public service. And the title of it is Concrete Ceilings, African Canadian Women and the Pursuit of Leadership in the Public Sector. And one of the things that we learned through that research was that Black women, women of African descent, they have broken through glass ceilings. Yes, we have broken through glass ceilings, but for many of us at different points in our career journeys, we have discovered absolute concrete. And I want to quote from that paper. Successful systemic change requires that systemic barriers that build concrete ceilings and hold them in place must be removed. So those in positions of power, those in positions of influence, those who are able to lead change must do so, because we must break the concrete ceilings to create space for others to follow. And if I could make an announcement, hot off the press, out of Ottawa today, motion 36 to have Emancipation Day officially recognized in this country, passed unanimously in the House of Commons about 15 minutes ago. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. That's amazing news. Thank you for telling us that. Perfect, thank you, Senator.
I'm so excited, I couldn't sit on that news any longer.
Thank you so much, we really appreciate that. That's good news. And now I'd like to introduce Yvonne Atwell.
Hello.
You're on, Yvonne. Just need to turn it on. There you are. Thanks.
Thank you, Wanda. First, let me say thank you, Wanda. That's very, very exciting. I remember last year when we had the Preston Township reunion, there was talk about whether that would happen or not. So thank you for sharing that information. But first, let me say that I'm pleased and honored to be part of this discussion this afternoon. I'm also a little nervous because my technology is not the greatest today. just to say a little bit about myself. I was born and raised basically in East Preston. I tell people this all the time, that my grandmother was a midwife and we were all born at home, all 16 of us. I have 15 siblings. 2 of them have already passed, but we're all very close in age. And we often talk about the fact that when we're all really close in age like that, you know, we have to start preparing our children and our grandchildren for the next generation to come. I guess for me, I was born 1 year before the end of the Second World War. And I know that makes me sound really, really old. But I say this because I think those of us who were born around that time knew and grew up in rural areas like the Prestons. I grew up in Preston as well, still live there. Those of us who were born in during that time, I believe, had a certain understanding of what it was like to work hard, to try and get ahead, to do whatever we needed to do to make a successful life for ourselves. So at a very young age for me, I quit school. I did not like school. It wasn't a place that I felt that I could learn. I was always very curious about things that were new and different, and I didn't find that school was giving me that at that time in my history. So I left there and left Nova Scotia and went to Toronto. And in Toronto, I think what started me thinking about wanting to do better, because I had to go back to school, I had to continue learning and upgrading my education, was the fact that my very first job as a very young, I was like 17 years old, excited about life and very curious. I took a job at a factory with a number of immigrant women who could not speak English, who worked very long hours. The factory was making plastic flowers, and you were paid by the flower. This was in the early 60s. So I got the job. I didn't last very long because it was like working 9 hours a day, making flowers, no time to sit down. There was supposed to be a lunch, but nobody ever took it because you wouldn't make any money. And so I remember the first time that I took a lunch break, which was the first day of my job, because I grew up in a family where you sit down and you eat your lunch, or you sit down and eat your dinner, you don't stand up. But yet I see many of the women who work there standing up, eating their lunch in one hand, having a drink, then going right back to working. And I realized they had to make as much money as they could. So after about the second day of me sitting down, the boss, who walked through the factory every day around noon, just walked through. The second day, he called me in and said that I wasn't working fast enough and he was going to let me go. Because what had happened on that second day, I had notioned to some of the women to come and sit beside me. It was just sitting on it was a wooden box or a wooden bench to come and sit beside me. And I believe one of them did. If I'm trying to remember, it was the second day or the third day. I know I wasn't there longer than 3 days. Came and sat beside me. And after that, I was gone. And at that time, it got me thinking about, is people treated differently than how I was treated growing up in a very large family? And why is it happening to these women? And I think that's where my first notion, my first consciousness around, I guess maybe social justice. Because basically I went to Toronto to find work, to meet my friends, and to really to kind of grow in a different way. I wasn't looking at any kind of, I wasn't looking at anything that may pull me down, but to lift me up. And that's because I was so curious about everything. So after that, I took a number of jobs. I actually went back to school, continued learning and growing. And I worked in Toronto for 23 years, even though I intended to work for 5. And I landed a job at Mount Sinai Hospital, which was a great hospital. And I moved up through the ranks, before I left there after 20 years or so, I was managing a kosher kitchen where I was working with a mashgiach who was the overseer of a kosher kitchen. I learned how to order food. I learned how to cook food. I learned how to talk to people about their in the work that they were doing around that. I also worked with patients because I did go back to school and became a food supervisor. So I worked with patients as well, making sure that they had their meals on time and that sort of thing. That kind of brings me to the fact that the first HIV/AIDS person that came to Mount Sinai Hospital, they didn't know what was wrong with him, and I was the one that they sent to get his menu every day. Now, this was a difficult time as well. I just wanted to work. I just wanted to be happy. I was very curious about learning and growing. And I experienced a lot of setbacks during that time. And at one point, I decided I wanted to come back home. I wanted to stop and move back to Nova Scotia to see if things were different here than they were when I left. I didn't see much for a young woman when I left Nova Scotia. I didn't see any way that we could really uplift ourselves during those days. I mean, that was like, I was 17 years old. I didn't know very much. So it was really hard for me to kind of figure out where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. And just like Dr. Bernard, there was people in my life that I don't know where they came from that helped lift me up in terms of what I could be, what I wanted to be. My family was great. They were fine. But these people were strangers that I worked with. And most of them were white women who saw something in me that I think that maybe I didn't see in myself at the time. So I continued to learn, continued to grow. I started being part of the Food Supervisors Association during those days. The food supervisors who worked in nursing homes and hospitals were not paid very much money. We did the same work as dietitians, but at the same time, we were not seen as the same. So just to jump forward a little bit, coming back to Nova Scotia, I felt that I was strong enough to move forward to do some of the things I wanted to do, but I didn't know what. I kind of fell into politics. I kind of felt it, but I was aware because I was so curious about things, and I traveled quite a bit. And I was aware that there was things in my community that hadn't happened. I had left for 20 years, and some things still looked exactly the same as it did before I left. And I remember there was a group of young people in Preston who wanted recreation for themselves, wanted better recreation, and they had a group of people young people, who was called, I forget the name of them, they were like the Preston group, where young people worked along with me. They didn't know me, but they worked along with me and Jerry Taylor and others because they wanted a recreation center. That moved on, of course. That's a whole story around that. But for me, getting involved in politics was kind of like something I fell into. I talked to people who could see something in me that maybe I didn't see in myself, and it started to grow, and I started to learn, and I started to understand the piece around social justice and what needed to be done. And working with young women really and truly built my own confidence, but also helped me build their confidence. And so lots of experiences. These are stories that you can't tell in a day or in 10 minutes. Lots of oppression around running as a Black woman for the first time in Nova Scotia. Lots of opposition, especially when I ran for the leadership of the party and traveled across the province. But for me, it was like, if I'm doing it, it's because I can do it. Nobody is telling me that I can't, although people were saying that, but I felt I could. I had to give it a try because I was always curious about what would happen if I didn't. I was more afraid of what would happen if I didn't try, if I didn't jump in and do my best and to try to bring other people along with me. So that was very encouraging for me. But the history that came out of being born in 1942 as a young woman in a small Black community where, a lot of oppression. I mean, a lot of things that we could not do, a lot of things we could not think about doing. And to move from there to where I ended up back home, which I love. And I'm so happy I moved back here when I did, because my eyes were open. I could see things that I didn't see before I left, and I understood more about how the community, what the community needed, and how could I play my part in doing what I did. And that was a big reason why I ran and won my seat. So thank you very much. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. That was wonderful. Thank you. And next we will bring in Marlene Clark.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes. Marlene, you need to put on your camera, please.
Okay, just a second.
Yeah, take your time.
Come on. Oh, I don't know what I'm supposed to. Sorry.
That's fine. If you can't and you just, we'll just put your picture up, your photo.
Thought I had this. Come on. No.
There we go.
There we are. Good
Excellent.
afternoon.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marlene Clark, and I was born and brought up here in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And I like always to talk about when I was a young girl back in the early 50s, still a teenager, but back in the early 50s. And when we got into high school, of course, we always wanted to find a job. And back then there were no jobs to be had. It's according really, if you were dark-skinned person, you just didn't get a job. So mainly it was housework we had to do. And I thought, you know, that's really not what I want to do. So it came out in school that they were looking for young men and women, your boys and girls in high school, to join the reserves. Back then it was called the militia. And I was one of the first. There were several others at the same time. A couple of very good friends of mine from Sydney, Nova Scotia, we were in the reserves together, the nurse girls. And I still think about them. Anyhow, by joining the reserve, we were taught we could go administrative, we could work as on the military side. And in the summers, we went to Camp Aldershot and we trained there. During that time, I was also in high school, and I finished high school with a secretarial degree, and I wanted to work in an office. So I would look in the newspaper and see that they wanted a secretary here. And they didn't call them administrative assistants then, and a secretary there. And I would apply. And when I got there, they would say, oh, the job has been taken. The job has been taken. But back in the day, we didn't have the Human Rights Commission that we could complain to. I mean, we just had to really live and bear it. But I do remember my first job was working for child welfare under the direction of Mr. Oh my goodness, don't tell me I've lost my, anyhow, the gentleman who hired me down at the provincial building. And those days, the secretary pools were set up like almost in school, and the supervisors were in like a glass cage, I will call it. Mr. H.R. McKinnon, who was the director of child welfare, that's who I worked, my first job. And he said to me when I went in, he said, you know, we've never hired a colored person before, but we'll give you a try. And my words to him that day was, you know, there's two ladies out there in the secretarial pool, and we both graduated from high school together and went to vocational school, so it's no different. Anyhow, I worked there for 5 years. And when I left, I was leaving because I got married and we were transferred to Montreal. And he said to me, if ever you come back to Nova Scotia and you'd like to have the same job back, it's here for you. The other thing is, I like to tell the young people today that what we went through in the 50s, you wouldn't put up with today. Being young and married, you tried to find someplace to live. They 1 minute they would say, yes, the apartment is available. And you say, well, when my husband comes home from work, we'll come by to see it. You'd go there. they would say, no, it's already been taken. And it was really a color thing. It was racism. But anyhow, we got through that. And I always tell my grandchildren and friends and family that what you need today is an education. You need to be aware of what's going on. You can't always just jump and fight and be angry. You got to know the facts about what's happening around you. And as far as the military is concerned, while I was in the reserves, I decided I would like to join the Air Force. And this was back in 1953. And I was in the Air Force Reserves for a while and then transferred over to the CWAC. And Black girls were not allowed to join the Air Force at that time. Now in 1954, early in 1954, that was changed. And one of the captains came to me and asked me would I still like to join the Air Force. By this time I had met the man of my life, and I got married in 1957. During my time, and my husband was in the military for 31 years. And during that time, we spent about six and a half years in Germany, which was the highlight of my life. I just loved it so much. And again, there, we lived in the towns, or what they called the villages. And the people were very curious because I was lighter skinned than my husband. And at first they said, no, they don't want us to be living there in their community. And we couldn't leave Canada and go to Germany and join our husbands unless they had housing for us. But we did get housing in a German home family. They were beautiful people. And they were so proud to say that they had 2 Black people living in their community. The Americans, I'm sorry to say, the first thing they'd ask you, are you American or Canadian? And we would say we're Canadians. And because the Americans, they had, I think, more money and more opportunities. And I think maybe people didn't like the way they portrayed themselves there. Anyhow, we came back from Germany in 1971. And then I didn't have any children until then. And my landlady in Germany said to me, or told a lot of us ladies there, if you take a bit of heather home in your suitcase, I guarantee you'll get pregnant. Well, I just laughed at that, but sure enough, it happened. In 1972, I became pregnant with my now #1 son, Les Clyke. And I would have liked to have gone back to Germany and said to my landlady that, your words came true. I don't know whether I'm making sense of what I'm saying here. I'm a little bit nervous. I have traveled extensively when I was in Europe, enjoyed every minute of it. I came back here to Halifax and I worked for the government for a few years. And then we got transferred to Montreal and I worked there. And then my parents became ill and I came back to Halifax. Now I have a sister that lives in Victoria, British Columbia. I have another sister that lives in Montreal. And I had a brother who passed away about 10 years ago. And he was in the military, he was in the Air Force. And myself. And I always said, when I leave Halifax, I'm never coming back. But believe it or not, I live in Halifax. I live in my home that my father bought on Creighton Street. And I'm still here. And I'm very proud to say I'm living in the homestead. And I think that young people today take so much for granted. They don't seem to appreciate the things that we really had to struggle for. But I have to say that each and every young person that I meet, I always mention to them, if you can find a job, join the military. You can work in the military and you can retire and have a good pension after 25 or even 30 years. And it's certainly not like back in 1953 when my husband joined. It's almost like having an office job today. So anyhow, that's about all I think I have to say. I feel honored to have been asked to join this group, this forum. And I don't know how my name came up, but I feel very privileged. I would like to thank you very much for having me.
Great, thank you so much, Marlene. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Our fourth speaker will be Dr. Lynn Jones.
Wow. Good evening, everyone. I'm just absolutely overjoyed to have the opportunity to talk with everybody this evening. What a panel. Wow. And I think I can honestly say to be part of this panel and being able to talk about first, my role as the first who paved the way for me, and all the first yet to come. So I've actually, for a change, it's unusual for me. I've actually written some responses, and that's only so I can keep within the time period, because I could have stayed here and talked to you for days and shared. So bear with me. I want to take you back to being a kid. And as a kid, I dreamed of being a foreign ambassador. And I would travel around the world and deliver messages on behalf of Canada to lands far and wide, including, of course, African countries. And as a youth, I did not equate that dream of ambassadorship with being in public service, believe it or not. I did not make the link between my role and a role in public service. Many others around me wanted to be social workers. And much as I appreciate the goal to be a social worker, and the most Reverend Dr. Wanda Thomas Bernard being a social worker, but I reasoned at that time that social work is part of being a foreign ambassador, and that as a foreign ambassador, I'd actually make more money. So that's the way I was going to go, foreign ambassador. But in later years, I did not meet the official prerequisites for being a foreign ambassador. Still, without even realizing it back then, I understood that I liked meeting people, serving people, solving problems, resolving conflict, and building consensus. All traits that make a good public service worker. I was building these skills from an early age. I was teased, actually, though, and this is the truth to this day for the rest of my life, because I'd made such bold announcements on this ambassadorship. I actually, because I didn't become an official ambassador, I had justification to make to my friends. And so with these same people, I said, well, nonetheless, I carry the traits of a foreign ambassador to every position that I've occupied. So I wasn't a failure. It seemed natural for me to, when I joined the federal public service at 26 years of age, that I came in as a young Black woman at a level that very few Black people got to achieve. I was a program administrator in the Manpower Office in Dartmouth, now known as Service Canada, which also had responsibilities for the Black community of the Prestons, and we heard from Preston area. Prior to joining, I had work experience as a student in public service and community jobs. I firmly believe that community work experience developed in the critical ethics and values that I carried into the public service and maintained throughout my public service career. My philosophy is no person should work for the public service without first working in the community. And if we have time, I'll name some of those community jobs. The fact that I entered the federal public service at the officer level was because others before me that I never had the privilege of knowing or meeting had campaigned to create this equity position. I stood on the shoulders of those who cleared that path. I want to thank those unknown leaders, truly thank them, because due to their efforts, I took a meaningful job where I was afforded the opportunity to serve and advance others, and more than that, to design policies and programs for others' advancement. After all these years, I don't know the history of the lobby to create the job I was staffed in. It was certainly not that the federal government woke up one day and said, we need this position. Leaders before me whose struggles is erased from our history, who were likely never recognized or honored for their work, who had the foresight to see what was needed and to fight for the establishment of positions such as the one I occupied, are the heroes and the heroines. I came into the federal public service with great hopes and aspirations, and with no doubt I'd be a manager, a senior manager in no time. I was confident, my positive self-esteem intact. Yet 33 years later, I never advanced from the level of my original position. How could this be? I worked hard. I was a progressive leader. I represented new management styles that appreciated equity. I acted in higher positions, but never was seriously recruited for permanent higher level positions. There is presently a class action suit of which I am a part, launched by federal government employees, federal public service workers, that seeks to investigate the systemic discrimination experienced by Black workers in the public service in hiring, training, and upward mobility. I can name several initiatives I've been a part of which paved the way for other Black people to be accepted into employment in the federal public service. Yet many today have the audacity to say, I got here on my own. No one helped me to achieve what I possess today. I view myself as a change agent, and the status quo would never work for me. To make effective change for all equity groups, I challenged the status quo. I wanted equity groups hired, promoted, and treated respectfully. My change agent approach served to make managers nervous. And when the status quo resisted and blocked change and those calling for change, I gravitated to involvement in the trade union movement. While I believe I can claim success in areas of public service I was involved in, my greatest moments were when the individuals and groups we agitated for change for showed appreciation for what we had accomplished. I remember that there was blatant absence of persons of color in union forums. Working with others, we recruited, trained, and supported equity members to attend meetings, train them on the issues and policies, speak up on microphones, support policies for change. It was good to see others take those first steps in leadership. In my job, I was an employment counselor for the Prestons, with authority to actually refer people to government jobs. I could only make recommendations to my coworker on who would be referred. I noticed my coworkers with the authority to refer were not referring Black people from the Prestons, or in fact, Black people anywhere. I fought for designation to allow me with expanded referral authority. I risked my job to fight to obtain that designation. It was not fair that the government's so-called merit principle did not recognize Black people as being qualified. It's challenging to be a change agent with the public service. The risks are high, and sometimes two are the accomplishment. There's many positions that you end up being in the first, but I'd like to end by saying, bringing us to yesterday. Yesterday we had the Zoom test event, and we spoke of the meaning of eldership. And I remarked, I do not always embrace the use of that terminology. It implies, like, does it really apply to me? After all, I'm not that old. I don't think I am. I'm just saying. Yet elderhood has its privileges. During these pandemic times, I've been blessed and highly favored in so many ways. Young activists offered support to me throughout the height of the Black Lives Matter movement by buying and delivering hot meals on a daily basis so I could attend events, including the many protests, and still keep up my busy activist schedule. I don't have to drive myself many times because those same activists make sure that I get to be to the protest and all the leadership that is required. Life is good. You call it first of the first. I call it no more first. We all have a right and need to be at that leadership table. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your words. Very good. Thank you. Our last presenter will be the Honourable Dr. Mayann Francis.
Good afternoon. I acknowledge our presence in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and I also acknowledge my ancestors and all those warriors who fought for justice and equality, and I thank them because I stand on their shoulders. I want to thank Dr. Teresa Rajak-Tally for the invitation to join the Speak the Truth to Power Forum with emphasis this evening on the first Black women leaders in public service. And I want to say what a privilege it is to be with the panelists, and I thoroughly enjoyed every one of your talk this afternoon. Throughout my career and in some aspects of my life's journey, I was always the first Black person appointed to the position or the first Black person in other personal aspects of my life's journey. Because the first Black person in appointments was not always easy. Nonetheless, I certainly do not have any regrets. For me, being the first meant that I wanted to be certain that there will be a number 2, 3, or 4, and more. My goal and my focus were to be perfect. As I said in my memoir, and I quote, "As someone who has a record of being the first, I was well aware that I was a proxy for all Black people. If I messed up, it might be years or maybe never before another Black person would be hired again," end of quote. I am also aware that even if I did a great job or whatever I was hired to do, there was still the possibility that systemic racism and or overt racism could prevent the hiring of number 2, 3, or 4 or more. I will admit that there were many times I wanted to give up. My memoir tells my story that my journey was not without its ups and downs. There were many valley days. Sometimes those feelings of hopelessness and loss were related to my position because of the color of my skin. I relied on my faith in God to keep me strong. In a speech I delivered at Dalhousie University in my role as the first Distinguished Public Service Fellow, I said, and I quote, "My religious upbringing and my faith have helped me maneuver the complexities of life, a life that I knew would often be a challenge because of the color of my skin and the racist behavior I have faced," end of quote. I began my employment at Dalhousie University in 1990 as the first employment equity officer. I was the first senior administrator hired to assist faculties and administrative units plan and implement programs of employment equity for women, visible minorities, Aboriginals, and persons with disabilities. I reported directly to the president at the time, Dr. Howard Clark. In my opinion, the reporting relationship is very important when implementing change. This relationship sends a strong signal that the university and or other organization or government is serious about employment equity and inclusivity. Change is difficult because people fear change. Subsequently, I was aware of the many challenges I would be facing. For me, I made certain to be very strategic about moving forward. Communications was a key factor. Whether a private corporation, government, or university, there must be effective mechanisms in place to monitor the progress of their policies on a regular basis. As I said earlier, commitment and accountability to employment and inclusivity must come from the top. Working in government as the first Black person at a senior level is also challenging. My experience as the first was in Ontario and Nova Scotia. In Brooklyn, New York, I was the second Black person to be appointed to a senior role in human resources in the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. My experience in the latter was more positive than it was in Ontario and Nova Scotia. Nonetheless, I made sure my personal strategy would mean success, not only for me, but also for future followers and for communities. Being appointed as the first Black Lieutenant Governor in Nova Scotia, and only the second woman in the history of Nova Scotia, was a defining moment, not only for me, but for history as well. Lincoln Alexander, the first Black Lieutenant Governor in all of Canada, and Michaëlle Jean, the first Black Governor General, and my appointment broke the color barrier for Black people by joining the elite and exclusive club once reserved for white males. The three of us smashed the glass ceiling. To paraphrase Maya Angelou's poem, Still I Rise, we are the dream and hope of the slave. Discrimination and racism do not take vacations. They can rear their ugly heads anywhere and at any time. There are people who have unconscious biases and people who practice polite, hidden racism. As Lieutenant Governor, I knew the pressure would be greater than what I experienced in the past. Being the first Black person appointed to anything raises the question in the minds of some people whether the appointment was based on merit and qualifications or because of race. I tell the story of my role as Lieutenant Governor and the challenges I faced as a Black woman in my memoir. I loved my role as the Queen's representative, and I have no regrets. I completed the role with dignity and respect. I expect someday there will be a number 2, 3, 4, etc., whether Black, Indigenous, or Brown appointment. The path has been made clear. Being the first in private business, government, university, religious institutions, the military, sitting on boards, or even in your home or condo or apartment, or as an entrepreneur, will always present challenges, some worse than others. Nonetheless, we must not allow this to stop our progress going forward. We must pave the way for future generations, just as our ancestors paved the way for us. I stand on their shoulders. I want people to stand on my shoulders. I close this presentation with my poem I call My Beliefs. Hey, education is top of the line. Why not continuous learning? Oh yeah, books, humans, stories, talks, movies, films, plays, songs. Love yourself and love your community. But don't forget to love all of God's creations: cats, dogs, fishes, humans. Strategic thinking. Communicate. What does that mean? Positive outcome. God, my advisor. Internal and external human advisors, females and males. Help for climbing over the fence, climbing over the barriers, and climbing up the ladder. Compassion, honesty, and caring makes one feel good. Strong spirit cannot be broken. Truth sets one free. God's love. Forgiveness? Yes. Anger, depression overcome. Ride the course of faith for strength. Standing on the top of the mountain, remember, humility is down below. Selfless? Yes. Selfish? No. Leading the cause for goodness? Why not? Inclusivity? Determination? Why not? Ancestors, thank you. Next generation, Black leaders, Black women, Black men, Black youth. God's call, God's purpose, faith in God. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you to all the women panelists. Thank you. I know that you all are very busy and have a lot of speaking engagements, so we are really honored that you joined us here today. I don't know about the rest of the audience, but being among these women, even virtually, has made me feel this small. You know, I'm deeply honored. Many important things were said, you know, and starting with Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard, I like your description of the concrete ceiling as opposed to the glass ceiling. You made it quite clear to us we are not a homogeneous group, and some of us break glass ceilings and some of us break concrete ceilings. Not only that, let me make it clear to everybody listening in that Black women, strong women, we are not born with a DNA labeled strong. We are socialized into this position because of our social, economical, and cultural conditions, and because so many people are dependent on us. You know, when I say so many people, I'm talking about family, community, society, and the world. I will ask all the panelists to go ahead and put on your cameras so that we can see you while I ask questions that have been sent prior to the meeting. So given that background and the comments made by all these strong, powerful women, can you tell us if, because this strong Black matriarch kind of image sometimes works against us, because oftentimes people do not see us as humans with feelings and emotions. So I want to ask the panelists, if you can tell us about a particular time in your journey that was almost breaking. It was like the turning point. Do you go back? Do you go forward? And if you went forward, what motivated you to go forward? And what was the result of that forward movement? If anybody would like to start, don't want to call on folks, but who is, Marlene, could you put on your camera? And Shirley, you could put on your camera as well.
Let's start video. It's at the camera.
Yeah. Oh, fine.
I can jump in if you want, Teresa. Yeah, I remember my almost breaking moment very well. Um, it was during a time I had actually a discrimination complaint, myself and others in the trade union movement, and we charged the union at the time, PSAC, with systemic racism and discrimination. And at that point, I had been playing very much a leadership role within the movement. And as a result of launching that complaint, the weight of the organization came down on me. And it came down in ways that you can't even imagine. For example, many of the positions that I occupied were taken away from me. I was accused of breaking the whole union forums and all kinds of things. But one thing that, and I was immobilized. I became immobilized, and the other members and workers, and particularly people of color, weren't used to that. They were used to seeing me in that leadership role. But what really saved me was those same people, because they jumped in to when they could see that I was immobilized, that they were going to take the banner and provide protection, encouragement. In many ways, I think about it now, sometimes it was like, oh my gosh, you can't do that. Like their immediate response, for example, was, let's go to the media. We'll tell them, I thought you'll be crucified if you start out in that perspective. But that is what really saved me. It was the fact that the time that you spent building with others, for others, alongside others, that when given the opportunity, that they moved in to assist and protect me. So regardless of what happened, it didn't matter to me at that point. It was that, I mean, nowadays they talk about they had my back. I don't know I understand completely that. So I still thank many of them that are around today for that, because it's not all fun and glory being a leader. And there are times that you don't know which way to go or what to do. So I share that with everyone. You only get that, though, if you build and worked with people to develop along the way. It doesn't just happen. There's work that has to be done to lead to that.
Thank you for sharing that human part of you. I think Senator Wanda,
Yes.
Thomas, do you want to go next? Yeah, sure.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to weigh in on that as well.
Mhm.
I want to start with a quote by James Baldwin in 1961, when he was asked by a radio host about being Black in America, what's it really like? And he said, and this is a quote, "To be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a state of rage almost all of the time, and in one's work." So I would say that I have many rage moments, times that I could go into an absolute rage, and they happen often. However, I know enough not to act from a place of rage. And so I have learned to work through the rage. I have learned to use the rage to fuel the passion to keep going when you don't feel you can do anymore, when you feel you can't keep going. And one of the other things that I would say that's really helped me from getting to a point where, you want to give up, because that can very easily happen, as Dr. Lynn was saying. But surrounding yourself with people that you can debrief with. So whether it's family, whether it's, a support group, people you work with, whatever, but having that group of people that when you're in that rage moment and you need someone to help you come down, then you need people that can help you with that. So finding strategies that will work, and that's going to be different for everybody. But recognizing that some of the challenges that we have to deal with can put us into a rage, but we can't allow ourselves to go into those rage, to give into those rage moments.
Thank you, Senator. I have a book by an African-American female author, and she labeled it Eloquent Rage. We have mastered that eloquent rage amongst ourselves. Dr. Mayann Francis, please. You need to put on your microphone, speaker.
Of course, there has been moments. If you're a first, there could be many moments, but one that stands out for me, and I will not name it, but what got me to keep going forward is basically just what Senator Bernard just said. I had the support of community, had support, as I said, as faith in God, and I had support of the Black people who were in the organization where I was. So that got you through that, and that is so important. And that's what I always think about. What's so important is that you have to make sure that, as Senator Bernard said about rage, yes, don't make decisions when you're angry, because you're going to make the wrong decision. And I was just so happy at times when I was angry, but go home, sit, get on the phone, people come over, we'll talk, and it always worked well that way, and that calmed you down. And then again, praying was another thing that kept me going as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Atwell or Ms. Marlene, do you all want to jump in there? Tell us when we reach that stage of rage, because we are human and we do heal to the pressures of life. What makes us change?
Well, for me, like the others, there are many times when somebody had to talk you down. So I always had a list of people I could call, especially if it was a work-related issue, that I could call before I sent the email or made another phone call. One of the things that kind of stick out for me is when a director of an organization that I was working for was very racist against the work that I was doing, but not telling me outwardly what the problems was, but telling other people. And so the time that I went to talk to her about this, I was enraged when I went to talk to her. And I must say, I had to give her a little piece of my mind. But because I had already done the work that I'm supposed to do, how long are you going to fight with me? You have to back off. And so I think support is essential. People you trust, though, people that you know that's not going to take what you're saying to them and turn it around, especially if it's a work issue, because sometimes you don't know who those folks are. They may say, I support you and I don't believe this or that, but you're never sure. So you have to build your capacity. And like I always said, no matter where you go as a Black person, you must always with you carry your pen, your pencil, and your book. Because at some point, somebody's going to accuse you of something that you didn't do. And oftentimes it's a racist action.
Thank you. And I would add, and always find your community wherever you go. We have a few more minutes, and then we have a special guest who's going to be invited on to close us off. So I would like to give the last few minutes to Ms. Marlene, and then I will have a question for Shirley. Ms. Marlene.
Thank you very much. What I found when I was working or in any organization, they would come up with the term, you're not like the others, or you're not like them. And what I found helped, I would just talk to them and say, what do you mean? And sometimes they would apologize again to me. So, well, I didn't realize that was a racist term or what have you. So it's things like that. And to be honest, I didn't get enraged because I don't think you can solve anything that way. I would just talk to them one-on-one, or sometimes when we had group meetings within the office, and then they understood. And I just hope that what I laid forward then, that the young people today can take up the torch and keep going, because you can't always fight. It's not about fighting. Sometimes you just have to stop and explain, and then they'll say, you know, thank you very much for telling me that. I didn't realize that. For instance, one of my jobs, a young lady who was a very good friend of mine, she was a white girl. And every morning I came into work, she would say, "Good morning, sunshine." So I just one day talked to her and told her, "Thank you very much, because I come in, I'm got a smile on my face and what have you." But that type of terminology is racist to our people. So just say, "Good morning, Marlene," and that's fine. And to this very day, we're friends. And she often remarks on that. She said, "You put me in my place." But
Thank
it's
you,
something we
Ms.
have to talk.
Marlene. We have so many questions. We could stay here all night talking, but I want to give the last word to Shirley. Shirley, as the co-host and a student and first to first in many ways, what has listening to all these powerful Black women leaders meant to you?
Yeah, I'm first and foremost so inspired by every single one of you. It's really good for me, especially coming from a rural community in the Annapolis Valley. There's not a lot of mentors that are around, or public people that I could see or look up to. A lot of them are kind of in the city type place. So it's been really nice to just hear everyone's story and just to know that all this work has been done. But yeah, it's given me a lot of hope and a lot of excitement to start get more education and get into, you know, hopefully working within the government and stuff like that. Just coming from a family with two deaf parents, especially with my mother, and living in a small one of the Black Loyalist communities in Gibson's Woods, it's been a challenging life, still is. The policies that are put in place, you know, really needs to be readjusted and relooked at. There needs to be more people like you guys, and you know, people like me, you know, leaders and stuff like that, far into policy making and stuff like that. I think that's the main thing. It's really important, and I definitely know this panel, it really showed that a lot of work can be done. With my mother, she currently is in a class action lawsuit right now with the School for the Deaf. So she went to basically a boarding school when she was 3 years old. She was taken away from her home and she went to a boarding school in Amherst. There was a lot of abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, educational abuse, everything like that. So my mother was there, I think 3 or 4 years, along with a lot of other deaf people around Nova Scotia, Atlantic Canada, and Newfoundland, and New Brunswick, and Ontario. So yeah, she was a part of that. And me knowing right now, I'm only 21. This was my mother. She was in a boarding school. So it's a lot of intergenerational trauma as well. So I know growing up, I really experienced a lot of that. So, and even with jobs as well, because my mother's hearing impaired, she's been denied a lot of jobs and employment down in the Annapolis Valley because she's deaf. So I've had to face a lot of, you know, systematic racism, not just because my mom is Black, but because she's deaf. So that's an added on barrier. But these women here really gave me some hope for my work that I would like to do towards my inspirations in the future. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Shirley. As Ms. Boyden, 105 civil rights women, said, there's so much work to do. And these women have carved the pathways and still are doing it. But I think we could all agree the future is in good hands with people like Shirley. We have hope all the time when we meet people like you. So thank you, and thank you for being a great co-host with me tonight. I would now like to introduce our special guest who wants to say a special thank you to our panelists. We have, we put on your video and speaker, Dr. Deep Saini, Dalhousie's University President and Vice Chancellor, is here with us and would like to say a special thank you to our panelists. There we go.
Thank you, Dr. Rajak-Tally. It's such a pleasure to be here. Good evening, everybody. And as as Teresa was saying, I have the responsibility of the president of the University of Dalhousie University, and in that capacity, as you know, I participate in many events. These days, they are virtually always virtual. And I must say that there are few of those participations that give me greater amount of pleasure than the pleasure I'm receiving today by being in the company of these extraordinary Black female leaders. And the pleasure that I'm going to get, the honor I'm going to get from having the opportunity to present certificates of recognition to thank them for sharing their brave journeys with us. I was hiding behind the scenes and listening to some of the comments, and I must say that in the few minutes that I've been here, they've been already a tremendous amount of learning. I have to say that whenever I have been in the company of our African Nova Scotian or Black citizens here, and I've spent a number of events with them, two things happen. I realize that while I have had my own experiences that sometimes are similar to yours, your experiences and the way you have dealt with them are amazingly inspiring. You know, in just in these few minutes, I've learned, you know, when Dr. Lynn Jones spoke about about the power of having the community with you and behind you, or Senator Thomas Bernard spoke about the self-control in the face of rage, or you know, other experiences, Marlene's experiences. Surely your poise at the age of 21, when you said 21, I said, you know, how is this 21-year-old mature to the level of a 60-year-old? And you look definitely 21, but your maturity and the poise with which you shared your thoughts and the story of your mother is inspiring. And I feel that this world is in great hands if we have youth like you. So thank you very much for this opportunity to be with you and talk to you today. And I want to also thank you on behalf of Dalhousie University for sharing your experiences and wisdom tonight, and for your ongoing actions to make Dalhousie and our society, indeed, a broader society, a better place. This evening's discussion highlights that we still have much work ahead of us at the university and broadly in the society. But here at Dalhousie, at least, we are very, very committed to continuing to listen, to learn, to act, to make not only Dalhousie, but the world a better place. And thank you all so much for the vital work that you do in pointing us in the right direction constantly. I am honored to be in your company. And that honor continues with now my honor of virtually presenting the certificates of recognition to all the women who have participated. And I would ask if you could show the first one, and that one is for Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard. Senator, congratulations and thank you. I have had the joy of meeting you a couple of times, but then a little virus came in the way and has stopped us from meeting. But I am also looking at the light at the end of the tunnel, and I think we're going to be able to see one another soon, and I certainly look forward to seeing you. Thank you very much for the work you do. The next distinguished woman to receive the certificate of recognition is Miss Yvonne Atwell. I have lost the picture, so I am unable to see.
Yvonne, could you put on your cameras? They took.
I'm even actually, Teresa.
There we go.
I can't even see the something has happened. It is at my end. Something's gone wrong. I'm unable to see the even the picture of the certificate anymore, but I will keep talking. And if it looks like that I'm out of sync with the picture that you're seeing, can you see me, by the way?
Yes.
Yeah, we'll
Okay.
help you along.
Yeah,
So,
the problem is at my end with the
Ms.
camera.
Yvonne Atwell.
So
Yeah.
the next one, as I was
So
saying,
Yvonne
was
Atwell is on.
Yvonne Atwell. And thank you again for sharing your wisdom with us and being here with us today. Next one, Ms. Marlene Clark.
Yeah.
Do we have that? Okay,
Yes.
Marlene, thank you.
Yes, we
so
have that one, and Marlene is on screen.
Okay, thank you so much, Teresa. And again, my apologies for whatever happened at this end. Thank you, Marlene, for your wisdom. And I hope that one day we will be doing these things in person, and I'll have the pleasure of sitting down and talking to you and listening to you in person.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Lynn Jones. Do we have the certificate on the screen?
Yes.
Lynn?
Yes, and Lynn, could you put a camera on?
Thank you for sharing your wisdom, Lynn.
My camera's on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Go
you
ahead, Dr. Saini.
for being here with us and for sharing your wisdom, Lynn. Truly grateful. And the last one in this list is the Honorable Dr. Mayann Francis, ONS. Mayann, do we have the certificate on the screen?
Yes, we do. We do.
Thank you very
Mayann's
much.
camera is.
And again, thank you very much, Mayann. Your wisdom and your leadership is evident, not just simply during this panel discussion, but broadly in the society all the time. I'm so grateful that we have citizens and mentors like you amongst us. And finally, it is my pleasure to now also present a certificate of participation to the co-host of this evening's Speak Truth to Power Forum, and that is Shirley Hodder. Shirley, you are from now on my favorite 21. Thank you very much for being who you are and for your boldness and the confidence with which you're sharing your story, and for being a bright light to the rest of the youth in our communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Saini.
So thank you.
We see you on
Let me
screen.
just finish by saying thank you one more time to everybody who has been on the panel, and thank you to the participants and organizers for tonight's Speak Truth to Power Forum, and for creating the space that is so important for this kind of a dialogue. Thank you very much, and back to you, Teresa.
Thank you, Dr. Saini. I know you're also quite busy, so we appreciate you coming and doing these virtual presentation of certificates, and hopefully we'll do this in person around the table with meals. So again, on behalf of Dalhousie, on behalf of the Speak Truth to Power Forum, I want to thank each one of the panelists, and this will not be the last. So thank you, and thank you, great audience, for being with us today. Great conversation. It has been live streamed. It's on YouTube, so people can feel free to look at it at any point in time. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Isn't it interesting? Just when you finish, the picture came back on. Now I can see you all. So thank you very much. I'm so fortunate that I'm at least able to say bye to you while I'm looking at you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Dr. Francis, where did you go